should be. All right. And yeah, Dr. Velasquez is teaching right now, so we'll fill her in and get her input post talk as well. All right. Well, cool. I'm glad everyone could make it. I'll try to make this pretty painless. It's just kind of I think we've gotten to the point now where we're ready to kind of start ironing out the kind of final details, logistics, and all that to kind of implement this project. So I'll kind of go through what we've landed on with regard to students' responsibilities, project members' responsibilities, and just sort of the data collection process. And then the last slide will just be kind of the final outstanding steps that we've got, and at least as I see it, to complete. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay. And yeah, feel free to stop me if there's any questions. There's some, I think, discussion points on here that I think feedback would be great on. We'll cross those bridges as we get to it. Okay. So as I stated, really pretty kind of concise agenda here, just talking about what students are going to be doing, project members, and data collection. I think I've said this before to most folks who are involved in this project, but this should be a pretty student heavy lift. So there shouldn't really be any kind of a whole lot of additional work for social work really to be doing aside from, meeting with patients and, providing kind of referrals and all that, which sort of falls within their purview as it stands, or at least as I understand it thus far. So we'll get into it. So as far as students, talk about training. So prior to the ED orientation, which is just sort of the kind of crash materials students need to know before starting their rotation in the ED. This will happen on October 30th if we were to, in theory, start on this next rotation. That's a Tuesday. So before we provide them with the kind of primer and engage them in the OSCE, they'll have a survey. So that'll be kind of an attitudes preparedness survey to get a baseline on where they're at with regard to their feelings around SBIRT motivational interviewing and their feelings of preparedness to sort of perform these kinds of tasks in a clinical setting. They'll also be given a written assessment that covers a lot of the domains germane to motivational interviewing, SBIRT, substance use disorder, diagnostics, and all that. That'll be another baseline. They'll also be expected to complete these short reset modules, purpose of which is to kind of provide them with a little bit of it's just an educational resource such that they're a little bit more, hopefully raises their cognizance, conscientiousness as they enter into a conversation with folks who are engaged in potentially risky substance use or have a substance use disorder, so they're not using stigmatizing language and inadvertently alienating patients during these conversations. So we'll record those baseline scores. Oh, here's Dr. Weems. Hey, Dr. Weems. Hey, Dr. Weems, we're just kind of diving in. So we just got started. So glad you're here. Right, so we'll record that baseline data, and students will be expected to just kind of email me the reset module certificate so that I know that they've completed it as part of that kind of arm of the project and their responsibilities. And
Shane,
again,
real quick, how intensive are those reset modules, like time-wise?
I did them in probably 45 minutes, hour-ish, yeah. So it shouldn't be too taxing, yeah.
Okay.
And I thought they were valuable, helpful to do. So as far as the first day of their clerkship, the orientation, so we're going to just add the SBIRT kind of training materials primer to the back end of the ED orientation itself. I talked to Dr. Coyne about this, and we're able to kind of push the ED orientation to a little bit kind of earlier in the day such that we can make room for the primer, which at least in this framework, is delivered by Dr. Velasquez plus minus Dr. Berg, if there's any availability there. After that, they'll get a little bit of a break in between both of those. And we were shooting for a 12 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. OSCE time block. I talked to Liz O'Gara, who runs the kind of OSCE simulation rooms over at the Health Learning Building for the medical students. And she has a slot open that day, but it's from 1 to 3:30. The only issue with that is that Dr. Velasquez has a course that she teaches on Tuesdays that starts around 2:30. So I would need to talk to her about whether she would potentially be okay with, catching maybe the first part of these OSCEs. And then, these would all be recorded, because Liz O'Gara has a way to sort of record what's happening in these rooms, and then evaluated sort of post hoc as opposed to sort of like live.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on Mary's behalf. So yes, she does teach a motivational interviewing class on Tuesday afternoons. The OSCEs are set up to where the way we've done these trainings before is we will run the simulation, and then one of the trainers will come out from behind the observation room, give some MI-informed feedback, and then the learner would go straight into another OSCE simulation to incorporate the immediate feedback. So we would need to have at least one, if not two, trainers involved for each of these OSCEs. But it doesn't have to be Mary. Mary and I are both Mint trainers. We also have some other ones across campus that we might be able to enlist, and her project will fund those. So I don't think Mary's presence will be a make or break for all of these.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, that's perfect. I had talked to her a little bit about that before, and it sounds like there are we have cases already that have been used in previous sort of simulations like this, as well as sort of sim patients, and it sounds like there are, hopefully some coaches we can enlist in the interim here. But that's good to know. And I've communicated most of that to Liz. I'll communicate the rest of it. And so we can hopefully just sort of reserve that spot on a monthly basis. So just to be clear, the ED clerkship is 1 month as opposed to the usual 2. So we'll have 4, maybe 5 students per month who are kind of going to go through this training. And there's 6 total sim rooms at the HLB. So we should be able to, in theory, run the simulation for all 4 students simultaneously, as opposed to sort of staggering it, which should be helpful just from a kind of a time and bandwidth perspective with Liz.
Actually, we'll just have to see if we're going to run 4 at a time.
Yeah.
That might be a challenge to get 4 Mint trainers all together at once, but let's see.
We'll stay tuned. Yeah.
The first day of clerkship orientation is always on a Tuesday. Is that correct?
Typically, yeah, because we do something called intercession on Mondays, which is kind of just like a check-in for all the students, and usually takes like all day.
Okay.
Essentially, it's every other month is going to be on Tuesday. Since we're on 4-week cycles and the rest of them are on 8-week, intercession occurs every 8-week cycle. And so it just alternates.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Okay. Yeah, so it'll be Tuesday on the weeks where there's intercession, i.e. all of the rotations have ended. And then after that, and then there'll be a Monday orientation on the sort of the mid way, if that makes sense. So,
okay. That we might be able to maximize Mary's time then on those Monday sessions.
Definitely. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, we can also take that offline and iron out those logistics so that they make sense. But cool. So yeah, with regard to the OSCE, and I'll touch on this a little bit more as well, but there will be a grade associated with the OSCE. That's really more so it serves kind of 2 purposes for us. It's data that we can use to basically say that the trainings and simulations are resulting in, some level of baseline competency for the students. But also it gives us some eyes on the students as they work through these interactions, such that we can feel a little bit comfortable having them do it in the hospital with real patients, and give them that feedback that's necessary, such that they're not, again, sort of inadvertently alienating patients, or making them uncomfortable, or causing harm, basically.
Okay. Can I just interject real quick? I don't mean to monopolize this, but
Please.
I just want to make sure we're being mindful about this, because usually in motivational interviewing training such as this, using an OSCE format, we don't assign a grade per se, because it implies an evaluative context. What we have done in our workshops is we will establish the baseline. We'll have standardized codings that we share with each of the learners. And then we also, separate trainers will separately evaluate those subsequent OSCEs. And so the expectation is you're going to see a trajectory of improved competence over time.
Okay.
But I'm a little leery about assigning an actual grade to each individual learner.
Yeah.
Kind of violates the spirit of the motivational interviewing training.
Okay.
But I don't know how that fits in medical education in this context.
Right. So we'd have to talk a little bit about how we can at least define kind of competency in administering a motivational interview, such that we can basically, when we write this up.
Minimal competence. Are they demonstrating at least or above minimal expected competency?
Right. So we could, maybe frame it as more of like a pass sort of type thing. Yeah. Well, let's keep talking about that. Well, I'll reach out to you and Dr. Velasquez. We can work that out.
Hopefully that's the last input I'll have today.
All good. No, this is what this is for.
This is Judge. Just real quick, Lloyd, do you guys have a short, like a quick turnaround remediation plan for folks who are struggling to meet that minimum requirement, but they're on the cusp of their rotation with the ER crew?
We don't, but we could build that in, bake it in.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Usually our mental health, our integrated behavioral health people we've run through this already have quite a bit more experience than a medical student would have in this scenario. So we really don't face that kind of deficiency or remediation in those situations. But having said that, we could, if that's going to fit the medical education model, we can certainly work up a remediation plan.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And I'd be way ahead of my skis speaking to the sort of like the med ed strategy at Del Med. And having been one, there's nothing more motivated than a med student who told that they failed to meet minimum standards. So I'm guessing we could like put on something pretty quick. People want to get better, want to get good. They want to get in the environment and learn more and see patients. So pretty cool.
That. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great idea. And we'll just, I think the biggest lift there is just going to be figuring out the time slot to do that, and working with trainers' bandwidths and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we should have those conversations, because that's something good to anticipate. Cool. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to move forward a little bit here, unless there's anything else. I'm going to condense this here. Okay, so regarding kind of the administration of the SBIRT, so this is we're now past training. So during the clerkship itself, students will be expected to perform at least one of these screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment processes with a patient. These patients will be identified either in one of two ways. If you are in the ED and you're looking at the tracking sheet, there's sort of the reason for the visit in one of the columns, and a lot of times those reasons for visits will allude to some pathology, either directly or indirectly related to substance use disorder or risky substance use. So there can be, I guess, hints basically within that tracking list, which can be useful for students if they're looking for a patient to do this with. Alternatively, if students were just to sort of see patients indiscriminately, and part of their history taking, which they're expected to do, their social history will be to ask about substance use. And so that'll be sort of effectively a pre-screen for students to identify, okay, maybe this would be a good patient to return to, after I present to my attending, and kind of go through the audit DAST potential brief intervention process. So I think the one caveat there is, obviously there are going to be some patients who may be uncomfortable with going through the screening for these kinds of things, or who don't want to do it, or maybe they are screened and their score is low enough to not really warrant a brief intervention. And in those cases, I think just for the students' benefit, to kind of help with their learning, and for our kind of data collection purposes to sort of evaluate this process, it'd be nice if they could try to do it at least 2 more times to see if they can get sort of a hit, as it were, to kind of go through this whole process, hopefully. And that number 2 is, I just pulled it out of a hat, just sort of arbitrarily. But just to, at least kind of increase the chances that they're able to go through the whole thing. There are exclusion criteria for patients with whom students will be able to go through SBIRT with. I don't have those as one of the slides, but they're included in the proposal, and maybe in our IRB, but I think definitely in our proposal, which I can send to everybody. Let's see. So with regard to the referral to social work, if patients are interested in discussing resources with social work as a result of the brief intervention, well, I'll get to that in a second. So just as an aside, I'm going to provide students with a packet that has resources that they can rely on as they're sort of preparing for and engaged in these in this SBIRT process. So that'll include kind of motivational interviewing, sort of tactic strategies, sort of a flow that they can kind of try and use just to kind of as for inspiration, if nothing else. It'll have the audit pyramid, the readiness ruler on there as well. And in addition, they'll have kind of a script that's sort of walking them through how to perform that referral to social work. So they'll have something to lean on, so they don't feel like they're just totally lost and attempting to do this completely from memory. And those are included in the upcoming slides. And just for our purposes for follow-up, we'll remind students to just sort of remember the patient's name, MRN, contact information, so that for follow-up calls, we can get a hold of them if it's possible. Okay, so just sort of kind of examples of the sort of cheat sheet here. And I'm going to send this to y'all just to kind of pressure test and vet. But it's just kind of walking folks through how they can use these two to sort of, and these are, a lot of the inspiration for these I took from the Sobering Center, who have similar documents to kind of help their staff walk through these conversations that volunteers and staff are having with patients who are getting ready to discharge. This is the script for referral to social work. So, and I'm just relying on my personal experience with doing this and sort of relative success, but calling the operator, getting a hold of social work, reason for the consult after identifying as a medical student, providing the MRN, kind of a brief summary of why they're here, and that you performed this sort of SBIRT process. Note their audit DAST scores, what was discussed kind of briefly during the brief intervention, where their readiness is. Insurance status is important to note, just to kind of guide what resources are able to be provided that sort of makes sense in the patient's context and circumstances, and then any other kind of pertinent information that social work would find helpful for their interaction. And then thanking social work, obviously. So after the referral is made, students are going to be expected to sort of reflect on their experience of going through SBIRT with patients. So they'll have a self-eval form, which they can fill out completely, or just in as much as it's useful to kind of reference during a debrief meeting with Dr. Velasquez or Dr. Berg, and I'll be there just to sort of talk about what worked, what didn't. It's an opportunity to get a little bit more formative feedback. so as they move forward and potentially attempt to do this or something similar to it in subsequent rotations, they sort of have that last kind of piece of information to hopefully shore up their confidence even more. In the midst of all that, once the SBIRT self-eval are completed, and we'll talk about this more, but students will record the requisite data that we'll be asking for from that interaction to be inputted into REDCap. And we still need to build that out. I'll talk about that in a little bit. After students have completed this whole process and have kind of attended that debrief meeting, that'll be the kind of last action item for them. And at that point, we'll ask them to complete just sort of the post-written assessment. So it'll be the same written assessment, kind of evaluating the same competencies. They won't know how they did on the first one. So there shouldn't really be I'm going to rely on the score and remember what answers I got right and wrong to sort of inform their doing this assessment again. It'll hopefully still be fairly raw, or at least informed based on their experiences and the training. And then they'll redo that post attitudes and preparedness survey. And we will measure the changes in scores for both of those. And I have a rubric for scoring that attitudes and preparedness survey such that we can kind of quantify their positive or negative attitudes and feelings of preparedness. I'll receive those results and upload those to REDCap. And we can, at that point, share those results with students to let them know how they did if they want to know. This is the sort of last component for students. We're going to be doing follow-up calls just as a kind of the efficacy arm of this, or the impact arm of this study, and also just kind of provide students with an opportunity to sort of see kind of what really plays out after a patient's discharge. I think sometimes the assumption is that, we have a plan, we tell the patient the plan, they discharge and they follow it to a T, and we feel awesome and feel like we did something really important and meaningful. But as we all know, sometimes that does not always, or is not always, the case. So this is an opportunity, I think, for students to kind of get a better idea of the barriers that exist for patients, to hopefully inform their subsequent interactions with and formation of plans with patients as they move forward, which I think is important for medical students to learn early on. So that's the kind of, meaningful kind of personal medical student, helpful for their kind of, subsequent experiences as a provider. But for the study, it helps us to kind of know what's happening and whether the resources we're referring patients to are helpful, what barriers they're experiencing, and it kind of serves as a sort of quasi needs assessment for us. So there'll be a 2-week and 4-week follow-up. The 2-week really is just for the students. It's not really for the study. It's students and patients. It's just an opportunity for the student to check in, see how things are going with the patient. It's worth noting that for both of these follow-up calls, there is a script that provides some protection with regard to if the patient says, hey, I have this medical question and I want you, the student, to sort of answer this or provide me with medical advice. There's students will then engage in a prescribed script that basically defers that question to the project team, which will include providers who can follow up and answer that question more effectively and sort of legally, or licensed to answer that question. But otherwise, yeah, it's a check-in for both the student and patient to kind of have that sort of somewhat longitudinal relationship. The 4-week follow-up will be more focused on kind of determining whether patients were able to connect with the resource that they were referred to, if they were referred to a resource, and whether that resource was helpful. And that's sort of an open-ended kind of qualitative question and answer. And then we'll repeat the DAST and audit scores over the phone as a quantitative measure, as sort of a proxy for reduction in use. So a lot of the literature out there suggests that, at least for risky alcohol use disorder, SBIRT is effective in reducing that use. So we're going to try and determine if that's the case for us as well. So, and then these are sort of, the questions as to evaluating what happened with their preferred resource. And then students will note these responses, record them, as far as I see it, is in terms of the qualitative measures as free text and red cap. And we'll input the DAS and audit scores as more quantitative measures in red cap.
Sam, I'm wondering if we could maybe get some input from Francis and or Rachel about this aspect. I just know anecdotally that oftentimes it's challenging to connect with patients once they leave the hospital. And I'm also wondering to what extent this will be done in conjunction with our SBIRT experts, or is this something they would do independently? How would that flow?
Right. So Rachel and I have talked about this. Initially, the thought was potentially to see if, just because some students will have moved on from this rotation by the time that 4-week mark comes up. So there's a logistical challenge there. But Rachel has communicated to me that yes, like certainly there is, it's hard to follow up with patients, even with the provided contact information that we receive from them. And it sounds like there's maybe like a 30% response rate. So I think that the benefit here is that students are able to, in the event that they connect with the patient, to have that experience of, what's going on, what's happening, how are things going for you, which, if the patient doesn't pick up, okay, but if they do, then it's a valuable, I think, data point for students, just sort of on a personal and emotional level. But it may be that we just don't have the power to really statistical power to basically glean anything sort of meaningful from these 4-week follow-up calls, just because of the reduced response rate.
That's okay. Actually, you're answering my question. I'm not so worried about from the research aspect of this, just more logistically, because they're going to be giving a report to the social worker about following up with additional resources. So they're going to be off rotation by the time this comes around. So I'm assuming there wouldn't be a conflict with Francis or Rachel doing this, or a need for their supervision around this piece. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And hopefully they're still able to make this call, but it just depends on their obligations and bandwidth on the next rotation that they're on. And that is rotation dependent and specific. If they cannot do it, I obviously have some free time during my 3rd year, and I'm happy to make these 4-week follow-up calls in lieu. But obviously it won't be as educational, I think, just for the other medical students who would otherwise do this, but would at least, if we do connect, we can have some kind of evaluation of the impact of the SBIRT process.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm the guy who's always bringing up challenges here in this meeting, but I'd also want to just point out that I think this is a wonderful aspect of the training for the medical students, because those that do respond, the people who do pick up, for them, there's a lot of studies that show suicide risk prevention in the ED setting. One of the most powerful interventions you can do is follow up and connect with a patient after they leave the ED who's at elevated suicide risk. And so I would like to think that we would see a similar thing. Those that do pick up, I think it'd be gratifying for the medical students to see that people have made some changes, are sustaining those. So
totally, I could not agree more. And I think that if we emphasize that in our primer and kind of walking them through their responsibilities, I have faith that the medical students in this 2nd year are going to feel pretty motivated to engage in these follow-up calls, even if they're on another rotation and it's sort of logistically a little bit complicated. This is something that they're expected to do just as an assignment during their internal medicine rotation. I remember doing it, and I loved it. I thought it was a really, really great adjunct to that curriculum. So I think one thing to think about that I was thinking about, so in the re-administration of the audit and DAST on these follow-up calls, there is a potential chance that, and I think it's possible I'm catastrophizing here, but a chance that, scores go up. And, whether, and if that's the case, and who knows, maybe the individual scores are not something that the patient himself is paying attention to. But whether what the role is of a potential kind of this, discussion around that, open-ended question, sort of motivational interview, kind of guided discussion around something like that over the phone, and whether students will feel comfortable with that. If a patient is experiencing shame as a result of something happened after they discharged, and it was hard to meaningfully reduce use, and or something really stressful happened, and it kind of ramped up, and that shame is sort of expressed over the phone with the student who may feel less equipped to sort of handle that sort of emotionally, and whether that might be a little bit distressing for both parties. But that's just something I thought about. And obviously I can't prepare for every contingency that may or may not come up on these phone calls. But and maybe it's just a faith piece, just to have faith that the students will be able to kind of be there for the patient, and be empathetic, and talk to them about this in a way that's sort of open-ended. But just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Sam. I think for the people that we are able to reach, which is, about 30% or so, a majority of the folks maybe are still struggling with either their substance use or some kind of case management need or basic need that they need met. And so I think that's why they're open to the phone call and accepting of help. But there are some patients we also reach who, it's kind of like what Lloyd said, like they had a good interaction with a healthcare provider, so they're more open to answering the call too. But I was just thinking also, there is a good portion of our patients that we call back and they're still struggling when we repeat the audit. And we kind of help them through like that almost like second intervention, which there's no right answer for that. I mean, I've had patients still drinking on the phone and like kind of doing like crisis intervention in the moment. I've had patients move away and worried about hospital bills. And I mean, you can't prepare for it really, but I think it's good that the students try, but I don't think they're going to get much response rate.
Totally. And I think go ahead. Sorry, I'm interrupting someone.
No.
I was just gonna say, it could be too that, if maybe there's a clause in the script for students where if they just feel like I don't know where to go from here, and my intuition is not helping me in this circumstance, and then perhaps there's a way to sort of include in the script, hey, it sounds like you're really
to go to the hospital, go to the ER if they're in crisis, or they can call their primary care doctor, they can call resources. That's
kind of a deferral.
I think we do a little bit more than that, but I mean, you never know where someone's going to be when you're reaching them.
Right.
Someone else is talking, sorry.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, so we can continue to explore that, but I think probably having a deferral option there, just to say, hey, let's continue this conversation with someone I know who is going to be really helpful, and maybe sort of walking them through that process of connecting them with someone who may be more helpful for that crisis. To your point, if they need to go to the ED, or if they need sort of a higher kind of escalation of care for whatever they're kind of experiencing, then maybe that's an option. But it's like you got something in the chat. Okay, Dr. Williams is signing off. I'll check in with him afterward. Okay, so that's the follow-up arm there. I think that's it for students' responsibilities. Here are the kind of respective scripts. The kind of text-heavy part of these is just the concerns about medical care coordination and sort of what to do in the event that happens. I am anything. I'm not a very concise person, so those could be tweaked a little bit, but okay. Project members' responsibilities. So this is just kind of the outlying stuff that it's sort of done kind of in the background, or in an auxiliary capacity here. So the SBIRT training will be Doctors Velasquez plus minus Berg. OSCE will be hosted by Liz O'Gara in the Health Learning Building. Potentially hosted by the nursing school if we come upon logistical challenges there. They have another simulation area that we might be able to use there. I haven't actually reached out to them about that yet because it seems like things are going hopefully in the right direction with Liz. Talked about the Be Well grant and its use for us there. Referrals obviously would be performed by the ED social work. And I think something that'll be helpful is just to kind of note where they're going or where they've been referred, so we can communicate that to the students so that they can kind of ask informed questions during the follow-up. The post, okay, so yeah, so this is an important, I think, point too. Hopefully social work can help us out with this or briefly administer it. We have a short kind of survey for the patients in addition to kind of what the students are doing. And this is just a survey that's evaluating what the patient's experience at the SBIRT was. If they felt respected, if they felt like it was a meaningful conversation, if they felt like this is something that they wish more providers would do, things like that. And that kind of gives us a little bit of a finger on the pulse when we look at the data at our kind of regular intervals throughout this study to just say, oh, wow, patients are not really, having positive experiences with this. How can we tweak that or make it, more sensitive or whatever the need is there? Or maybe they are enjoying it and we can, keep doing what we're doing. The post-SBIRT debrief, talked about that with Dr. Velasquez, myself, Dr. Berg, potentially, and that can be done over Zoom. Data entry, so I'll be doing a lot of that, and the participating medical students will be doing a lot of that. And then follow-up. I mentioned this before, but I think we should, hopefully students are going to feel motivated to do that 4-week follow-up and have that continuity. But yeah, okay. Any questions about? I believe I covered basically all of the kind of outstanding stuff that the other parties here be engaged with.
Will that survey be something that ER social worker does like right after you guys do the SBIRT and then we just collect it in real time?
Yeah, right. So if the referral's made for y'all to go and meet with the patient to kind of talk about resources / referrals, after that conversation's had, I would just say, hey, we have this just kind of a experience survey. We just want to make sure that, as we continue to do these interventions, that we're doing it, respectfully and in a way that feels like it's adding value to your experience here in the ED. And they can, if they can either fill it out in real time in front of you, or is something that is that the student can go back and pick up. It may be better, since it does kind of evaluate a little bit the sort of the student's SBIRT administration, that maybe y'all pick it up and either scan and email it to me, or I can come by at regular intervals to pick it up and input it, just for kind of so we're compliant with all the HIPAA stuff. But I just
when does it start? So I could tell my team to expect that.
Sorry.
When does it start? So I could tell my team when to expect it.
Yeah. So if all the stars align, hopefully we can start by the next rotation, which should start like October 30th.
Okay, so it's still a ways away.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
And yeah, and let me know if there's any if there's a bandwidth issue anywhere, please let me know, because I can either personally shore that up or kind of rearrange things. I just I totally realized I hadn't actually talked to y'all yet about the patient experience survey aspect of this, so I apologize. Let's see. Okay, and then so this is kind of the last sort of component here. I don't have to go through all of this, super in depth, but a lot of this is in the proposal itself. But so there's 3 kind of overarching objectives, and they can be thought of as the sort of curriculum evaluation arm, the student attitudes preparedness arm, and then the impact arm of the SBIRT administration itself. So this objective 1 will be kind of more so kind of curriculum evaluation, which is sort of translates to increasing SBIRT completion with patients in the ED who meet criteria for brief intervention and referral to treatment. So the first goal underneath that sort of objective is increasing medical student competency as evidenced by their pass rate of at least 80% in the post-training OSCE, and an average 25% increase in their pre to post-training written assessment scores. So that will that's how we'll define increased sort of competency. Those will be our benchmarks with our process measures there. The second goal will be just sort of increasing the number of completed SBIRT encounters by 60, where completion is defined by the screening using audit and DAST, identification of risk, need for subsequent intervention, performance of brief intervention is indicated, and referral as indicated. So that'll, and it's essentially, we're calling it an increase in, by 60, but the understanding is that the previous baseline number of SBIRT administrations right now is currently 0. As far as kind of the data collection entry there, the relevant tasks and activities there will be the training module with Drs. Berg and Velasquez, the pre and post training assessments, the OSCE itself, and the medical student sort of administration of the SBIRT in the ED. Second objective, which is the medical students' attitudes and preparedness. This is just going to be measured by that pre and post attitudes and preparedness survey scores. And as I stated, we are able to quantify their responses associated with sort of positive, negative value to determine whether their attitudes are improving in a positive sense or preparedness is improving in a positive sense versus negative. So contributing to that will be the completion of the reset modules, the completion of the post-ED SBIRT self-evaluation, the debrief, and then obviously the surveys themselves. And we'll be looking kind of at intervals, like I stated earlier, just at sort of where we're at, if this goal is being met. At the sort of the intervals I've mentioned down there, December, March, and September. The third objective is going to be the impact arm. So this is going to be basically are the SBIRT interventions resulting in increased motivation or readiness to engage in behavior change or reduction in use, cessation of use, et cetera. So we'll measure at the end of every brief intervention will be, we'll ask students to implement the kind of readiness to change ruler and ask patients to kind of self-report where they're at on that 1 to 10 scale. The thought is that by the time we're doing that readiness to change ruler, we'll have already have been a kind of brief conversation grounded in motivational interviewing principles and strategies. So hopefully we're able to sort of get them to a place where they're saying, at least 5 in terms of their kind of motivation to change or readiness to change. And that'll be asked by medical students immediately after they complete that sort of brief intervention, or it'll be kind of part of the brief intervention. So that'll be the kind of the outcome measure there.
Sam, I have thought about that one.
Please, yeah.
And again, I'm going to look to our SBIRT experts here, but I'm wondering if this might be an unrealistic goal. Again, part of the spirit of SBIRT is that you're meeting the patient where they're at. So you're going to have a number of patients who are going to say, I'm a 1, I'm a 2, regardless of how much expertise is delivered with the MI intervention. And so, it's the goal of an SBIRT intervention is to meet a patient where they're at, kind of guide their thinking by evoking more change talk, but trying to predict that you're going to get them at least at a 5 might be setting up social workers to feeling less efficacious about their work in this regard. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we don't, we certainly don't have to, and I agree with you. It was, I think this sort of came from, I think I just had a little bit of difficulty in trying to define sort of success with regard to motivational interviewing, which, to your point, in the context of it being sort of letting the patient kind of lead the way, there's a subjective component to it there.
Well, you're already defining success in many ways. If you
Yeah.
get, from 0 to 60, that's a win,
Totally. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, really, the only other kind of outcome measures we'll have associated with this third objective, which or just in the following slides, are those follow-up calls. Whether they were able to sort of get connected with a resource, or what their follow-up audit and DAS scores were.
And
So
that might be opportunity to if they're going to be re-asking where they're at, I think you might get more bang for the buck about seeing a ruler score maybe being different post, rather than right at the get-go expecting someone to
be at a 5.
get a 5.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Yeah, no, that's a good consideration. We'll have to talk more about that. I like that idea. But yeah, I think, even in the absence of this, I think that we have, to your point, probably enough to define and justify whether or not this is, working.
For me, if I get someone from a 1 to a 2 who's just really contemplative, that would be a win. But
right. Well, yeah, maybe the measure is then that there's they're going to be assessed on their readiness to change just anyway, and so we can sort of note that, whatever that is, and then redo it at the follow-up call, and depending on students' motivations, and figure out if there's a change and if it's positive. So
I think sometimes I call it a win if they're open to talking at all.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good point. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, cool. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think as we move forward with this, we'll encounter, I think, a lot of things that maybe I hadn't totally considered as of yet, and we may have to also pivot a little bit more and change our baselines a little bit. But yeah, it'll be interesting to sort of see how it all unfolds. But I think it's exciting. So in terms of the kind of rest of the sort of goals underneath the impact arm here, the second goal would be the increase in the number of completed referrals to community resources made as a result of those SBIRT interventions by 30, where the baseline number of completed referrals, as a product of the SBIRT model, is 0 at this point. So we'll use that kind of completed referrals component there, and I actually have to include, I forgot to include the sort of repeat audit DAS scores, so just know that we'll include that as an outcome measure. But this third one here is just to sort of demonstrate that I figured this fit well underneath the impact of the SBIRT interventions, but just sort of measuring what patients experience, like immediate experience of that SBIRT process is, and whether if it's positive versus negative. I think that those are important things to kind of consider, even if there's not a whole lot of sort of meaningful kind of moving of the needle with regard to readiness to change. I think that, like, if there is an experience of validation that is augmenting and providing a space for their concerns to sort of be heard, and for an open discussion to be had, I think it's important for the patient's experience. So I think so we're going to include that as well in that arm. I think it kind of fits well there. And similarly, that survey is similarly scored as the attitudes and preparedness survey. So higher numbers are more exemplary patient experience. So, and then, with regard to the tasks sort of inherent to this, we'll kind of tweak that motivation to change thing there, but then consultation of social work, provide referral, administering the SBIRT post-SBIRT feedback form to patients, completing the needs assessment phone call at 2 weeks, and then at 4 weeks, to determine completion status of resource referral, repeat audit, and DAST, those things, and we'll include repeat kind of readiness to change and see if that's moved in a positive direction as well. So, and I have this sort of data collection recording sort of flow sheet that I'll provide to students as well. It's fairly straightforward. So I think, you know, as they're not, as far as their initial encounter with the patient, really what we're going to be recording is, you know, whether they screened positive, if a brief intervention was undertaken, if there was a referral made, and then the sort of subsequent measures will be that follow-up call, for which there's a 4-week follow-up data collection kind of recording flow sheet, just hopefully organized and help them kind of know what to pay attention to. But it shouldn't be something, the data that we're collecting in those encounters are not going to be like these, they're not going to have to be like jotting down furiously the notes of what patients are saying. It's just whether or not they were proceeding through SBIRT sort of in that sort of sequential way. So yeah, and then this is the last slide. Yeah, just kind of the next steps as far as things that need to get knocked out. Just ironing out kind of the OSCE logistics. Sounds like figuring out if we can do all 4 at the same time, or maybe try to stagger them, and how to kind of work with our time allotment there to do that and still give students a robust experience with the OSCE. So that'll be kind of an ongoing conversation. And we've sent in the IRB request. So we're kind of awaiting approval, or at least at the exempt status for that. Hopefully it kind of is comes in the next couple of weeks. REDCap, we still need to make and build out the REDCap forms, so we can start on that. And then, yeah, I just need to create those student packets, which have all of this helpful information for students. And then, yeah, if the stars align, hopefully we can get started around October 30th. The next window for us would be either potentially halfway through the rotation starting on October 30th, halfway being the end of the first arm of the ED rotation, or in January. So I think that's everything I have. But hopefully this was comprehensive enough that kind of covers where we're at, what everyone's kind of respective roles will be, and where we're going. And I apologize if this was a little bit, you know, kind of chaotic and a lot of information, and hopefully I delivered it in a way that was organized. But I'll make this PowerPoint available to everyone.
Oh, this wasn't chaotic at all. It was a lot of information, but very well organized and thought out, I think. Sam, can I follow up with 3 questions?
Sure.
Have you had some initial discussions with Dr. Velasquez about how many sequential OSCEs each trainee might be going through to demonstrate?
I believe I have had maybe one conversation with her in which, you know, because we were trying to figure out how long to make the OSCE, and this could be my imagination because I've had, I think, lots of different conversations with different people, but I think we landed on maybe 2 encounters. So one feedback, second.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk with more about that too. In our more involved MI training in primary care settings beyond SBIRT, it's usually 4, but that's a lot more. That's a 2-day training workshop before that. So I'm hoping 2 will do the trick. I'll talk to her about that.
Cool.
My second question is, you're about to submit IRB approval. Do you think that this will qualify as exempt status? I mean, we're dealing with the actual patient interventions here.
Yeah, I think it will qualify as exempt, even though we're working with patients, we're not testing a treatment or an intervention on patients. The study population, if you will, is actually the students, as opposed to patients.
Wonderful.
And we've couched the IRB proposal as quality improvement, as opposed to research.
Perfect. Thank you. Sam, last question is, are you already thinking ahead about taking this data, analyzing it, and preparing for poster and/or peer review publication down the road?
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah. So, and I think that, I mean, beyond planning to do that, you know, I've not, well, I'll have to talk a little bit more about sort of, I mean, if there's anything additional I can do beyond just sort of facilitating the study and the data collection, to kind of have the foundation of sort of what I need to write this up.
Oh yeah, no pressure there. I just wanted to plant the seed that this sounds like a really excellent study. It's well designed, and so it is something that should not just go by the wayside after completed. It should
Agreed.
be disseminated.
Yeah, I agree. Well, does anyone else have any questions? Can I clear anything up for anybody?
The only thing that I'll add is, in one of your previous slides, you had called out that the students would be completing their evaluations or assessments in a Google form or survey. That's probably fine, but I think there is a way that we can actually build that into REDCap so that they can fill out, like click a link, fill out a survey that just auto-populates REDCap, and it will save us some time. I'll have to play around in there and see if I can remind myself / teach myself how to do that. But we've done that before.
Sounds good. Yeah, that sounds great. And I know Dr. Coyne, we'd included Dr. Lawrence Brown in sort of our very initial conversations around this. And I mean, if he has additional experience with kind of building out the REDCap process, or if anyone does, I mean, just because I think that there's going to be a little bit of kind of a decision tree aspect to it. Yeah, I'm just anticipating that it's possible we may need some additional help with that, but we'll see. We'll see what we can do. Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's all. This file will probably be large, so I think I may just upload it to like YouTube and disseminate the link. And I'll get in touch with the folks who were in here, and if you guys have any follow-up questions or need anything to be clarified, you've got my email and my phone numbers, I think also my little signature thing too. So feel free to reach out to me and with anything. But yeah, cool. Well, I really appreciate everyone kind of joining the call. This is super helpful. I'm glad. Hopefully this gets everyone sort of on the same page.
Great, Sam. Thanks. Thanks for all your effort here.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Have a good one.
Yeah, have a great rest of y'all's Tuesday.